When the silence of the night mingles with the whistle of bullets. And when cities transform from vibrant homes into ashes scattered by the wind. And when time stops, for history to be written in the blood of humans. Here, an indelible hell is born from memory. It is World War II. The war that was not just a passing battle, but an earthquake that shook the entire planet. The war whose echoes still reverberate to this day. As if it is returning again in a new guise. In a world seething with turmoil. A world more like yesterday than we can imagine. When the sky explodes with fire. And when people turn into shadows on the walls. That is where the story begins. World War II. It wasn't just about numbers and armies. It was about stories of flesh and blood. Stories of heroes, traitors, and entire nations on the brink of annihilation. And today, as we live in a time rife with conflict, these stories remind us, the past could return at any moment. In the 1930s, the world was wounded. A stifling economic crisis strikes the people. The streets of Europe seethe with unemployment and hunger. In the midst of this darkness, regimes were born seeking power at any cost. Germany, defeated in World War I, felt humiliated. A man named Adolf Hitler came to ignite the fire of revenge. With his fiery speeches, his iron army, and his promises to his people, he restored the Germans' dream of empire, and turned Europe into a powder keg waiting for a single spark. Japan, in the Far East, searches for resources and control. And Italy dreams of the glory of the Roman Empire. And the whole world watches silently, until the day comes when everything explodes. September 1, 1939. German tanks invade Poland. In an instant, Europe is ablaze. Cities fall, borders disappear, peoples are driven by force. Armies move like hurricanes, and the sky rains fire. Months passed before France fell. Britain held out alone under the bombardment. Its cities burning, its children sleeping in shelters. But it did not fall. 1940, all of Europe was waiting for a long war. But Germany was moving like lightning. In just 6 weeks, France, Europe's most powerful army, collapsed. The streets of Paris were filled with enemy soldiers, and the famous tower, the Eiffel Tower, was draped with the Nazi banner. It was a shocking moment for the entire world. If France fell so quickly, who could stand against the flood? Today, how many powerful nations could suddenly fall if they underestimated the threats? Then came 1941. Hell expands. Hitler directs his armies eastward, toward the Soviet Union. Millions of soldiers, thousands of tanks, a merciless war. And in Stalingrad, the clock stopped. An entire city was reduced to rubble. Every house became a trench, every street a battlefield. In the end, the German army was defeated for the first time. And that was the beginning of the end. Britain was alone. The sky rained fire over London day and night. But the people didn't flee. They sang in the shelters, raising their morning tea despite the bombs. Churchill said, "We will never surrender." And they held on, until their resilience became legendary. Isn't this a message for us today? That people can be stronger than any weapon. Stalingrad, hell of fire. Winter 1942. Stalingrad. A city turned into hell. Every street a battlefield, every house a fortress, every wall a witness to blood. Soldiers fought to the last bullet, to the last breath. In the end, the German army was crushed. That was the moment that broke the back of Nazism. And today, don't cities in Ukraine, Gaza, or elsewhere relive the same scene? Cities turn to ash, people fighting for survival. War wasn't fought only with tanks and planes, but with minds and shadows. One of the most dangerous spy stories was that of Violet Sabo, a young British woman who joined the resistance network in France. She moved in disguise, transmitting messages, planning bombings, and gathering information right under the noses of the Nazis. Once, a German patrol stopped her, but with her cleverness, she pretended to be just an ordinary wife on a family visit, so they let her pass. But in the end, she was captured. Despite torture and interrogation, she didn't reveal a single secret. She resisted until her last moments, becoming a symbol of bravery. Her story proves that war isn't won solely with guns, but with courage and intelligence, even in the heart of darkness. The story of the German Enigma Code. The Germans possessed an invincible secret weapon, the Enigma machine, a complex encryption device that made every military message an unsolvable puzzle. Thanks to it, the Germans guided their submarines and planned their attacks with the confidence that no one would understand their messages. But in the shadows, there were minds that broke the impossible. In Britain, inside a secret place called Bletchley Park, a brilliant scientist named Alan Turing sat with a team of mathematicians and linguists. Long nights, complex codes, a machine that spun like a brain of iron. Finally, they cracked the Enigma code. From that moment on, the Allies knew Germany's secrets before its armies moved. They shortened years of war, and saved millions of lives, simply by cracking a code. The story of human codes, code talkers. On the other side of the world, the Americans were facing the Japanese. The troops needed a way to send orders the enemy couldn't understand. So the idea came, to use the Navajo Indians, the Native Americans. Their language is rare, complex, and not written in any book. It was transformed into a living human code. Dozens of Navajo soldiers were sent to the battlefields. They spoke over the radio in their native tongue. Ordinary-sounding words, but they carried precise military orders. The Japanese were listening, but unable to understand. Thanks to these code talkers, the Americans won crucial battles like Iwo Jima. They proved that language is, sometimes, mightier than bullets. Normandy, D-Day. June 6, 1944. D-Day. The largest military operation in history. 150,000 soldiers crossed the sea into France. The sea was filled with corpses, the sky with fire, the earth with blood. But they breached the defenses, and Europe began to be liberated. Normandy message: sometimes a decisive victory requires a great sacrifice, a heavy price, but it opens the door to freedom. But far out in the Pacific, Japan was striking hard. Pearl Harbor, that fateful morning, when bombs fell on the American fleet. The American giant awoke from its slumber and entered the war with all its might. From London to Dresden. From Moscow to Tokyo. The sky was no longer blue, but black with smoke. Cities were bombed day and night. Houses were collapsing on their inhabitants. And people lived between the sirens and the sound of death. In Dresden, Germany, the city was transformed into a hell of fire. In Tokyo, the fires of the bombing burned everything, even the air itself was on fire. From London to Dresden. From Moscow to Tokyo. The sky was no longer blue, but black with smoke. Cities were bombed day and night. Houses were collapsing on their inhabitants. And people lived between the sirens and the sound of death. In Dresden, Germany, the city was transformed into a hell of fire. fire. And in Tokyo, the flames of the bombing burned everything, even the air itself caught fire. The bomb that changed the world. Then came the decision that changed humanity forever. Hiroshima. Nagasaki. The first nuclear bombs in history exploded. In an instant, entire cities disappeared. Bodies evaporated, human shadows were imprinted on walls. The world discovered that man had created a weapon capable of ending all civilization. The end and its terrifying price. In 1945, the war ended. But at what cost? More than 70 million dead. Cities destroyed. Peoples displaced. And a world divided into two camps, East and West. And a new conflict was born. The Cold War. The war ended, but it left behind only one question. Have we truly learned from history? Hiroshima, the terrifying end. Then came a moment the world had never known before. Hiroshima, one bomb, a city vanished. In a second, tens of thousands were vaporized. In Nagasaki, the scene was repeated. The war ended, but the world entered a new era, the era of nuclear weapons. Today, as we hear of nuclear threats again, are we reopening the same terrifying door? The end and its terrifying price. In 1945, the war ended. But at what cost? More than 70 million dead. Cities destroyed. People displaced. And a world divided into two camps, East and West. And a new conflict was born. The Cold War. The war ended. But it left behind only one question. Have we truly learned from history? World War II was not just a chapter in history books. It is a mirror. If we look deeply into it, we will see our faces today. The world that burned yesterday still holds the fuel. And all it needs is a small spark, for the fires to ignite again. So, will we learn? Or will we rewrite the same catastrophe, with new names and more dangerous weapons? And today, more than 7 decades later, the world is reverting to what it was yesterday. Superpowers in conflict. An arms race returns. Wars rage in the East and West. Nuclear threats loom. And stifling economic crises reminiscent of the 1930s. Is history repeating itself? Are we on the verge of a third world war? Or will we wake up before it's too late?